Wow, so check this out, y'all. This is pretty crazy. So I'm sure you guys have seen The Problem with Jon Stewart. It's a podcast that I believe is available on, I think, Apple Plus. Obviously, he's a legend. He's a comedian on The Daily Show. He's a legend. He came back not too long ago, and I've actually watched some of his recent videos that he's done, his interviews. He interviews powerful people, and he challenges them pretty hard. And he usually goes to people who have like actual credentials and education. And so even if you don't agree with them, you're going to get some good information from it. So it's a really, really good show. But this is the worst video I've ever seen of Jon Stewart, I think, in my life. Jon Stewart is very notoriously popular amongst all peoples because he's like the one guy who would challenge both sides, Democrats and Republicans, even though he's liberal leaning. That is his allure. And he's very funny and charismatic, but if he were to just be a Democrat guy who just always, was rah Democrat, people wouldn't like him like the way they do now. So what you're going to see here is he's having on Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice. Condoleezza Rice, obviously, in the, was she Secretary of State? Yeah, I think she was Secretary of State under George W. Bush. And then Hillary Clinton, obviously Secretary of State under Barack Obama, both having some really, really murky waters, both of them pretty much, war criminals, right? So they're going to basically whitewash their war crimes right now. You're going to see Hillary Clinton whitewashing the Gadaffi situation in Libya in 2011, and then Condoleezza Rice trying to not only whitewash the Iraq invasion, which is just crazy war crime, but she's even going to try to get people to be more open to that kind of stuff in the future. This is really, really bad. Trigger warning.
Just very briefly on Libya, because that was on my watch.
But this is not, again.
No, but my point, I want to make a larger point because, Gaddafi was a bad actor. Everybody knew he was a bad actor, and he threatened to kill his people by cockroaches. The United States was actually the supporter of European countries through NATO and the Arab League, which for the very first time came and said, we want to be part of trying to protect the people of Libya now. So I feel that particular intervention, we had certain capabilities militarily that nobody else had, which we used to assist them. But, the Emiratis were flying and the Jordanians were flying, et cetera. The problem, and this is where I think you make a really good point. The problem is, okay, Gaddafi's gone.
Mm-hmm.
His horrible prisons are emptied. What comes next?
Right.
What comes next?
And that's always a problem because there's always a vacuum. Because, look, dictators don't allow institutions to flourish. So when you take the dictator out, there are no institutions.
That's right.
So but the question becomes, do you then say, let Gaddafi go ahead and kill his people because it's going to be hard afterwards? Or in our case, we thought Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Are you going to let that continue, or are you going to take him out? And then do the best that you can in helping people to recover. You have to recognize that it's going to be hard once you take the dictator out. But John, it's a little bit of a false choice to say, well, then just leave the dictator in place because it won't be chaotic. It may not be chaotic.
I guess what I'm saying is,
it may not be chaotic.
If we take
but
that
it might be
role
brutal
on,
against the people.
If we take that role on, can we sustain as a country? When you think about the Soviet Union's collapse, they overextended and they got in an arms race with us, and they had all these satellites. Are we overextending America's power, especially militarily, when you talk about an $800 billion defense budget?
Let's assume instead of being in a podcast studio, we were in the Situation Room, or in the tank in the Defense Department, wherever we were. Right. Okay, and we're saying, okay, what do you see on the horizon? Well, North Korea is shooting these missiles over our ally, Japan.
Right.
China is trying to build up its blue water navy so that it can compete with us anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You've got, the Russia-China relationship. It's tricky, but we have to watch it really carefully because we don't know where that might lead. We've got Iran, still a very bad actor, and probably in addition to killing their people, will cause some external problems in order to take people's minds off it. We have a lot of issues. So do we just sit back and hope for the best, or do we try to be positioned in enough places with enough support that we can be a good ally to those who are counting on us?
And you have to watch the potential rise of terrorism again. So you have a lot on your plate. But I would just say, should the United States be selective in the use of its military power?
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right.
After Afghanistan and Iraq, which we did for security reasons, not because we wanted to spread democracy at gunpoint, but for security reasons.
Although ultimately we were told that spreading democracy would make the world safer because freer countries would
Well, I think if
be
you
more peaceful.
actually look at the record, democratic countries actually don't invade their neighbors. Democratic countries don't harbor terrorists. Democratic countries don't use weapons of mass destruction. So I think
they don't harbor them, but they have them.
Well,
you can't. It'd be hard to. That
John,
was planned in
but
Germany.
they're not aided and
They're not
supported by
aiding
the
understand what
government.
you're saying. I understand what you're saying.
And the always
That
try to,
is a distinction.
But always try to look at the converse, right?
Yes.
Just because they have in some of these weak states terrorists among them, would you rather have somebody who's actually harboring them and assisting them?
Understood.
So that's the first point. The second point is that yes, we need to be more selective, but I would be the strongest voice, as I know Hillary is, when Vladimir Putin decides to extinguish his neighbor. Should the United States really just step back from that and say, well, that's kind of your business after all. Ukraine's been a part of the Russian Empire and so forth. And there are some people in the United States who would say, not in Ukraine, let's do it in Des Moines. And I think that's the bigger threat, that the United States will not feel that the American people will not feel the pull to continue to be the place that people can look when something awful like that happens.
But is it then the difference between the first Gulf War, which is Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait and the United States forms a coalition and helps push him out, versus the United States deciding these bad actors, we really are the only country. It's not that other people don't meddle, but we're the only country that actively promotes regime change.
Yeah, so that was really, really frustrating. I mean, I'm sure as you watched that, you were just physically like, whoa, I can't believe this. Like, this is so terrible, because the stuff that they're trying to justify is just so horrible. And they do such a terrible job at it, and they're just lying through their teeth. So what Jon Stewart is doing here is he's giving a platform to war criminals to whitewash their war crimes. And the craziest thing is he's not even pushing back. This is the least pushback I've seen from Jon Stewart in probably my whole life. And given how serious the horrific claims being made here by these two secretaries of defense, he should be even more than normal. He should be deviating from the mean to the right. He should be multiple standard deviations above the mean in his pushback. And that's what makes his show so good, is how much he pushes back. Like we saw, I forget which state it was, but as Attorney General, he just ripped her to shreds when it came to the trans issue. And he's doing none of it whatsoever. And so, talking about the 2011 situation in Libya, the Libya situation is interesting. Gaddafi was like this dictator who was like this socialist pan-Arab guy, basically. I think he'd been in power since 69 or something like that. But the best she could come up with in terms of justifications is bad actor and, threatened to kill his people like cockroaches. And so, there was this revolution going on as part of the bigger Arab Spring. And basically, I guess they decided to intervene. Now, originally, the idea was supposed to be to we're just going to protect the civilians. We're not doing regime change. We're not taking sides in a civil war, because that was just so bad. And it still is, right? To take sides in a civil war, it never ends well. And usually in those situations, you're choosing between a dictator and then ISIS, right? Which, ISIS is definitely worse, obviously, right? What I've seen from, the readings that I did in terms of this kind of thing, and check this out, this is really interesting. So it says, under Gaddafi's brutal rule, Libya had one of the highest standards of living in Africa. Now the war economy has since costs skyrocketing. There are widespread problems with medicine shortages and power cuts. Civilians are in danger of getting caught in unpredictable fighting, and kidnappings for ransom by militias are common. More than 200,000 people are internally displaced and 1.3 million are in need of humanitarian assistance, according to the UN. Casualty numbers are highly politicized and hard to verify, with estimates ranging from 2,500 to 25,000 during the 2011 uprising alone. International Organization for Migration estimates there are also about 636,000 migrants and refugees in the country, mostly from sub-Saharan Africa. And so this is an article that literally just came out. Let's see, this is very this is recent. It's 2020, so 2 years ago. Remember, the Libya intervention was in 2011. So now, this is 9 years later. War in Libya. How does it start? Who is involved? What happens next? And it's just like complete chaos. With no real clear control over it, and now all the different foreign countries are trying to get in. And pretty much, if you just read these articles, I've only really seen one defending the Libya intervention and trying to say it was successful. But this one right here is like an actual scholarly journal article in the Comparative International Law Journal in Southern Africa. I'll link it down below. You should check it out. It's interesting. But it basically makes the argument that it was neither lawful nor successful. Like the intervention wasn't even lawful under the UN resolution 1973 that they had passed. And it goes through the details, and a lot of the it's like supposed crimes that Gadaffi had committed that was like justification, that would be the justification for overthrowing him, were either just straight out fabricated by rebels, or it was, Human Rights Watch would look into it and be like, there's no evidence of mass rape. There's no evidence of being like air bombed and this kind of stuff. And so you can read into that. This one says the big lie about the Libyan war. The Obama administration said it was just trying to protect civilians. Its actions reveal it was looking for regime change. And so I've seen some people try to argue that it wasn't the overthrowing, but rather in the post time, they left. Everybody left. They didn't be there. But I'm not convinced that they actually were there just to protect the civilians. They were obviously trying to overthrow him, and they ended up, supporting the rebels, right? Which is just crazy because, again, you're stepping into a civil war. It's not clear that the people actually don't want him. And then you're supporting rebels and you're going to destabilize the region, which, again, did lead to ability for ISIS to take hold in Libya as well. So, again, this was definitely a failure. This was certainly a failure. And, again, it's like trying to claim that, what do we do kind of thing. They helped the rebels. They did come on that side. And then, Condoleezza Rice quickly comes in because, let me get on to something even worse, because Iraq is like 1 trillion times worse than Libya. Like, it's so bad. Like, these war crimes have like different levels to them. Iraq is the worst of all. Iraq 2003 is the worst of them all. It's crazy to think about because the conservative estimates of like deaths are like 200,000 civilians. 200,000 Iraqis. So think about how many lives that is that were lost in that war. It's fucking insane. And it wasn't legal. It wasn't legal. So Condoleezza Rice is recognized hard when a dictator false choice to let the leader in place because of no chaos. The leader will be, bad for the people. Having like a stable regime that's not going to cause mass refugee crises, as well as not allow the rise for ISIS, is far, far better than having ISIS in place easily. And then Jon finally offers some attempt at pushback. And it's his argument is that, can the U.S. last? And so he's not even arguing against the idea of these weren't legal and it was dumb to do. And it's not even really moral. Because again, you're talking about, if we were in, maybe you could say in a hypothetical world where it would be the United States can just intervene into places and insert democracy. It just ejaculates democracy into the canal. It's hypothetically you say, then that would be cool because morally it would be justified. But what happens when your supposed attempts at that are actually helping ISIS come into power and it's efficaciously not fucking working? The Libyan intervention, it didn't fucking work. It didn't work. It's worse off now than it was before. There's no clear control. There's a bunch of countries just trying to they fringe it off, and there's mass starvation and cost of living, and nobody has money, etc. So it doesn't fucking work. So you have to ask yourself, which one is better, having a Gadaffi in place or having just absolute insanity that there is? And then you have to question yourself whether the intervention was even legal, which, again, this one right here, under the resolution that it passed, it says it wasn't. It didn't talk necessarily about fully whether or not general international law would be legal. It actually dodges that question. But the point standing here that this is just absolutely insane. And then what's even crazier than the Libya debacle, which is terrible, but Iraq, again, 1 trillion, gazillion, billion, quadrillion times worse. She's trying to sell it, and this is crazy. So the Bush administration has low-key been trying to rehabilitate itself. So George W. Bush, he went away because his approvals were shit when he left. And so he just decided like, I'm just gonna sit out and like let people forget about all the dog shit that I did and then come back. And so that's what he did. And so his name is getting rehabilitated now. But like some of these goons, like this guy Ari Fleischer, which I think that's a German name, Fleisch means meat. But this guy's like trying to come in here, right here. The Iraq War began 16 years ago tomorrow. There's a myth about the war that I've been meaning to set straight for years. After no WMDs were found, the left claimed Bush lied, people died. This accusation itself is a lie. It's time to put it to rest. So you can see these guys, these war criminals, these like mass murderers, essentially. These guys are trying to rehabilitate themselves and their image. But this guy was lying. Says George W. Bush really did lie about WMDs, and his aides are still lying for him. Bush knew Saddam had no weapons of mass destruction. Salon exclusive. 2 former CIA officers say the president squelched top secret intelligence briefing by George Tenet months before invading Iraq. And so what we know here, and there was another article that I had pulled up that explained, it was actually, I think, the Washington Post, which the Washington Post, come on, dog, like, think of how much of that's literally a corporate news site. And even they were like, dude, you're bullshitting. So basically the conclusion was like, the Bush administration wanted to evade Iraq. It wanted to invade and overthrow Saddam Hussein, and it was just trying to figure out what the best way to do it was. And so there was some shitty intelligence. However, even amongst the intelligence, it was actually heavily contested. The intelligence within itself was also heavily contested, but they took the part that they agreed with and they sold that to not only the American people, but Congress as well. And so, like, obviously it's the executive branch, the CIA, all these people, that's the executive branch, right? And so, and it was off the heaves of 9/11, so everyone's moving towards executive power. And so, in those kinds of situations, even Congress can get tricked into that kind of thing because they straight up lied about what it said. And so they took only the stuff that they agreed with because they knew he didn't have WMDs. They just wanted to find a reason to invade. Even saying WMDs in the first place, what does WMD mean? Are we including chemical and biological weapons? Which is he going to use that? Because I think that only reason why you would say like invade Saddam, it's a security threat. Like she says there, she literally says it there, it's a security threat. So that means nuclear weapons. Why don't you call them nuclear weapons? Why are you calling them WMDs? That's the thing about the fucking Bush administration. This shit pisses me off too. I'm actually taking a U.S. presidency class. I'm at university right now. And one of the things in my political science readings that I actually learned is George W. Bush is not an idiot. That whole image of George W. Bush being an idiot is a complete lie. He had the most rigid daily schedule of any president, literally to the point where like every 10 minutes is accounted for. Whereas like Bill Clinton, for example, he would just show up late, terrible on his schedule, just go fundraising. He had the most rigid schedule. Um, he was so calculated that he would instruct pollsters to poll certain words on how to sell his agenda. And so when he's doing social security cuts, he's running polls to see, okay, well, what words can I use to sell my unpopular agenda to the people? Whereas Bill Clinton, he would poll to see what was popular incessantly. And he would just be like, okay, this is what I'm going to support. And so they had the opposite ways there. George W. Bush was extremely, extremely calculated. And this is the thing, he needed that because off the heels of Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton was like, one of the most intelligent people we've seen, right? He's really smart. So is like Hillary and Obama, right? These people are all very, very intelligent. That's how they're able to like manipulate and lie and stuff like that, right? And so that people were tired of that. People wanted the dumb, affable idiot. And he played that up. It's a character that he created. It's a character he created for political reasons. He loves that. He needs that to win. And then also, people absolved George W. Bush of a lot of the crimes he committed based on a stupidity appeal, essentially, or like a let off. Oh, he was just an idiot, though. He was just dumb. He wasn't evil. He wasn't evil. He was just dumb. That's seriously what a lot of these people say. Nixon was evil. Bush was dumb. That's what they say. Bush was not dumb. That's another way for him to get out of the war crimes, to get out from the responsibility of it. He knew this. And even people try to like, again, there's another strategy too. Oh, say it was Dick Cheney, say it was Karl Rove, say it was all these guys. He hired those guys. He knew those guys. It's not as if like, that absolves him of anything either, because he hired those guys. He knew those guys. He was the one who chose those guys, and he was the one telling them what to do as well. So he is definitely a criminal for sure, and he knew. So they knew he didn't have WMDs, but they just took the bullshit intelligence. They knew it was a lie, and they pushed it on the people. That's what they did. Not only the people, but Congress too. Especially in the aftermath of 9/11, it's like everything goes to the executive power. Everyone focuses on the president, like because it's all about finding that one leader and fighting. So it's a perfect opportunity to use the opportunity. So she's trying to whitewash her crimes here, is what she's trying to do, and it's really fucking disgusting because, like I said, um, not only was it 200,000, that's like the conservative estimate, of civilians died, but the whole country was destroyed and ISIS was hugely given rise. I wonder how much weaker ISIS would have been had we not invaded Iraq. I don't know. That would be a really interesting timeline to be in. But this is absolutely, absolutely just horrible. And she says that democratic nations don't invade other nations. What does that even mean? Of course they invade other nations. Um, Harboring terrorists and using weapons of mass destruction. The U.S. is the only country that's ever used nuclear weapons. I don't know what you're talking about. And even like the Taliban harboring the terrorists. Look, the Taliban are still there. The intervention didn't work. It didn't work. The Taliban are still in power. I guess what you could try to say that, oh, they're not harboring the terrorists anymore. I guess what you could argue. Um, and the whole Ukraine situation, obviously, I think at this point the Ukraine situation is getting a little bit tired in terms of like I think you just kind of have to let it go at this point, and just kind of let Russia lose and do its thing long term, whatever. Um, and they're talking about the whole idea. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, this money's going to Ukraine, and how we could use it to give Flint water or whatever." I don't really think that's a legitimate argument because, like, logically speaking, if you take away that like appropriation for Ukraine, that money's not all of a sudden going to go to where you want. So it's kind of like a waste of an argument, in my personal opinion. But I do think we're getting to the point where the Ukraine situation, like, it's kind of fizzling out. I would say I don't think Russia wins in the long game there, but I don't think it's sustainable for us to just keep like artificially like propping these guys up with a bunch of cash. But this is absolutely horrible. This is the worst Jon Stewart I've seen. All that garbage, and he provides no substantive pushback. And the thing is, this is such a huge deviation from the mean, because the mean is Jon Stewart pushing the fuck out of people. That's what he does. He interviews these guys and he pushes the shit out of them. Like, that's his whole thing, right? And so he's like way like out of line, way like a trillion standard deviations to the left of the mean, because now it's like he's not pushing back at all. This is the worst clip I've seen of Jon Stewart. This is horrible. And he should get a lot of pushback for this because he should know that he fucked up here. These two people are war criminals, and their attempted justifications are failures. And Condoleezza are trying to say, "Oh, we thought he had new WMDs, and so we had to stop him." Again, lies pushed by the Bush administration. They knew that they wanted to invade and overthrow. They were just trying to find bullshit, and the intelligence community was not even clear on that. And the articles, you can read the articles. They cite how, Dick Cheney said that Mohammed Atta had a meeting with an Iraqi, officer, and CIA is like, "Nah, bro, that didn't happen." FBI is like, "Nah, dude, that didn't happen." And then he's still saying it. So they were trying to put up the 9/11 ties as well, even when it wasn't obvious, it wasn't clear, and it was not backed by the intelligence. So it's just total lies. But anyways, really, really terrible. I'll leave links to the articles that I cited in the description box as well if you want to check those out. I recommend doing some reading on this stuff too. Always cool to learn more about these kinds of stuff.